Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, Director of Professional Development for the Brown School, and I am so happy that you chose to join us today. As is always the case with Open Classrooms, throughout this, you are muted and we can't see or hear you, but we very much want you to participate in the conversation, ask your questions, etc. So please use the chat feature. You can send in messages to just the panel or share comments and questions that the whole room can see by saying panelists and all attendees. So Open Classroom is something we've been doing since the Brown School closed its physical doors to large events, but we have always been about learning and community. And I'm particularly grateful for the sort of virtual proxy we have of our community in this very strange week in our country. Our theme of our programs has been around self-care, and don't know about you, it's felt like exactly what I've needed. So I'm grateful to be in community with you today and with our speaker and co-host. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Tiffany Phillips, the Brown School Communications Manager, who's going to be helping me host today's program.
Janet, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and I feel like there's a lot that I'll be able to take away from this and be able to use personally, and I look forward to you guys sharing your stories. I just want to share a little bit of information about next week's Open Classroom programs that are going to be coming up in case you can fit us into your schedule. Our Associate Dean and the leader of our Clock Fox Policy Institute, Gary Parker, is going to be with us Monday at noon, and he's going to be teaching a class called Introduction to Federal Legislative and Appropriations. On Tuesday at 5 p.m., Alok Vanan is going to be with us for our annual Masters and Johnson lecture, and he's going to be discussing Beyond the Gender Binary. And then Thursday at 12:30, we have a Brown School alum, Kelly Liu, who will be talking with us about Asian and Pacific Islander Americans with her presentation of Beyond the Model Minority Myth. And with that, I will give it back to Janet.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. So it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Megan Keyes is a clinical psychologist with expertise in evidence-based assessment and treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder in adults. She provides therapy as well as clinical consultation to mental health providers. And she has advanced training in prolonged exposure therapy as well as cognitive processing therapy. Since 2008, Dr. Keyes has worked as a national consultant with the VA Prolonged Exposure Training Program. She is an adjunct professor at the Brown School and one of the leads of our PTSD certificate for adults. I'm going to throw a link into the chat with more information about that because we are recruiting for our Fall 21 cohort of the program. Megan is a regular contributor to the Professional Development Workshop Series and also a returning guest here to Open Classroom, one of our most popular presenters. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Megan Keyes to talk to us about pandemic-related stress and sleep disorder.
Thank you so much, Janet and Tiffany. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Open Classroom, and thank you for joining us. As Janet said, our topic today is really going to be focused on pandemic-related stress and its impact on sleep difficulties, as well as spending a good amount of time reviewing guidelines for developing good, kind of healthy sleep habits. At the time we conceptualized today's topic, we anticipated that given the ongoing nature of COVID-19, pandemic-related issues would still be a central source of stress for most folks at this point. However, over the past several months, several other significant stressors have occurred, including some related to social injustice and the current presidential election. And in an effort to acknowledge these additional stressors and their potential impact, I've just made a slight modification to today's content. All right, so we're going to start with kind of briefly highlighting, what we've learned to date regarding the impact on mental health from these key stressors, as well as reviewing the role that stress plays in sleep disruption. From there, we'll transition to our designated topic of really looking at how various pandemic-related issues can disrupt sleep and lead to sleep difficulties, as well as reviewing guidelines and strategies for improving your sleep. And then finally, in conclusion, we're going to spend do some time doing a brief overview of some key stress reduction guidelines. So some of these tips are things that you'll be able to utilize over the course of the day to help kind of reduce your stress level, and others may be able to be incorporated into your nightly routine to help promote better sleep. Okay, so I'd like to start with just sharing some recent information from the American Psychological Association. For many years, the APA has conducted an annual nationwide survey, Stress in America, that looks at the impact of various stressors on our nation. However, since the start of the pandemic, they've been conducting these surveys more frequently. And what I'd like to share right now are some results from their recent report, which highlights what they learned in their most recent poll of about approximately 3,400 adults. So as you can see on this first slide, COVID-19 continues to be a significant source of stress for the vast majority of individuals. And close to 70% of the respondents indicated that their stress has increased over the ongoing course of this pandemic. About 50% of the respondents indicated that they're starting to notice kind of a negative impact on their behavior as a result of this ongoing stress. And kind of the most common changes that people reported are noticing increased muscle tension, having shortened tempers, and having unexpected mood swings. Okay, with regards to the issues of race and discrimination, the majority of respondents, close to 60%, regardless of race, reported that police violence towards minorities continues to be a significant source of stress for them. As you can see, this is currently significantly higher than this result was in the 2016 poll when this issue was first assessed. Within this particular survey, approximately among persons of color, approximately 44% indicated that discrimination continues to be a current significant source of stress in their lives. Now, regarding our current political climate, about 2/3 of respondents indicated that this presidential election has been a significant source of stress for them. And as you can see, this stress has impacted the majority of individuals across all three party lines. Just stepping back from the specific stressors and just kind of looking at the impact of these stressors on mental health, what we're finding is that about 1 in 5 adults indicated their mental health has declined over the course of this past year. And our Generation Z adults, ages 18 to 23, are the group that's kind of reporting the highest impact or the greatest impact. About half of the adults surveyed noted that the pandemics had a negative impact on their relationships, particularly around decreased closeness with family, friends, and community. And finally, a little over 60% of respondents indicated that they really could have used more emotional support than they've kind of received over the course of this past year. However, despite these stressors and their impact, we are finding that 70% of individuals still remain hopeful about their future. And a little over 50% reported that they still feel that they are able to use their voice to affect change in the world. So my primary goal for sharing this information this morning was really an attempt to validate and normalize what many people have experienced over these past many months. These ongoing issues related to the pandemic, social injustice, our current political climate are impacting most people in very real ways in terms of kind of unwanted or undesired changes in their mood, their behaviors, and their relationships. So if some of this sounded familiar, please know that you are not alone. And hopefully the information we'll be sharing today will provide some options on how to start reducing some of the stress in your life related to these stressors. All right. So one really significant way that stress negatively impacts us is the role that it plays in sleep disruption. When we experience stress, our brain interprets that stress as a sign of danger and immediately sends out a signal to our body that we need to be prepared to respond to that potential threat in some way. This is why stress is often accompanied by arousal. You may experience emotional arousal, such as feeling anxious, nervous, on edge, but also physiological arousal, muscle tension, increased heart rate, maybe rapid or shallow breathing. This arousal is incompatible with sleep because it's signaling our body to remain alert so that we can respond if needed. So this is one of the reasons that it's incredibly difficult to fall asleep when you're kind of actively stressed about something, because that stress is actually provoking your body to remain awake. Now, for some individuals who are dealing with chronic stress and who've experienced frequent sleep disruption over an extended period of time, that inability to sleep may become a source of stress in and of itself. And that stress around not sleeping is going to interfere with your sleep in the exact same way. Stress causes arousal, arousal promotes alertness, and alertness interferes with sleep. So what this really illustrates is not just the role that stress plays in sleep disruption, but also highlights why learning strategies to reduce stress can have a positive impact on your sleep. So if you are experiencing sleep difficulties and getting insufficient sleep, feeling very tired throughout the day, really struggling to complete tasks or activities, why is it so important to try to get good sleep? Sleep plays a really critical role in our functioning and our well-being. Sleep helps our brain work properly. Sleep deficiency has been associated with learning problems, difficulty concentrating, making decisions, and problem solving. Sleep impacts our mood and how we feel. Insufficient sleep has been associated with depression, anxiety, worry, irritability, and difficulty coping with change. And finally, sleep helps support good physical health. Chronic sleep deficiency has been associated with a range of medical issues, including cardiac and kidney disease, diabetes, and a compromised immune system, which can make it harder to fight off illness. So sleep is really one of our most basic human needs, and ensuring that that need is met is vital in maintaining good overall health. All right. So at this point, I'd just like to pause for a moment to toss out a quick poll question, just to get a sense of how individuals' sleep has been impacted since the start of the pandemic. So if you'd like to participate, please feel free to go ahead and put in your response. And we're just going to need a moment or so for these results to get tallied until we can see them. And I realized as I was putting this together that given we're all in the physiology of waiting for results at the moment, I can guarantee you this really will be done in a few minutes. So just hang in there and we will know what the results of this particular poll is. I realized after the fact this may not have been the best time for a polling question in the middle of this election. All right.
That was funny. So we'll give people just a couple more seconds. We do have some folks replying in chat. We're giving the invitation that if these don't capture what you're feeling, please, I'm sure. So we have people that would like to check more than one box, but the poll is as set up as check one. Sorry about limiting that. And Megan, do you want to take a look, or do you want me to share with you some of the things that are coming in?
Yeah, sure, if you want to share with all of us, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm not going to attribute to anybody because there's no reason that people need to know who said what, but recurring dreams about things bothering them, extra energy, like adrenaline fueled energy and not wanting to sleep, nightmares since the pandemic started, sleep disruption has been periodic but more frequent since March. In the beginning, I lost a lot of sleep. It seems to be getting a little bit better. Falling asleep early, but waking up early, would like to sleep longer. Generally can fall asleep, but stay awake for portions of the night. Getting more sleep and better quality of sleep. Okay, and sleep patterns have worsened due to extra stress and life circumstance. So now I'm going to share results of the closed-ended poll.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for offering some additional information around how your sleep's impacted, and some of those changes that you highlighted, we may end up actually covering a bit in the course of this as we talk about sleep difficulties. With regards to our polling results, you're going to see in just a moment when we get to the next slide, a lot of the sleep difficulties that people are reporting are kind of falling right in line with what we've learned in terms of how the pandemic has been impacting sleep so far. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next slide just so you can see kind of what we've learned so far based on a lot of survey data. Okay. There we go. All right, so what we have learned to date is that this pandemic is impacting sleep in a range of ways. The most common thing we're seeing is that sleep quantity and quality has kind of worsened over time. And a lot of those sleep difficulties have been attributed to stress and anxiety, changes regarded to lockdown, and schedule changes. So the fact that most folks on our poll today indicated that this is how your sleep has changed, you're kind of falling right in there with the norm of kind of the biggest sleep change that we've seen since the start of the pandemic. There has been emerging research that dreams are being impacted by the pandemic. Namely, people are noticing having more kind of anxious dreams, as well as having dreams that involve kind of pandemic-related content, such as dreams about illness, death, or even the virus specifically. So for folks who've noticed that type of shift, again, you are not alone. That is one of those emerging changes that we're kind of noticing with sleep, with the ongoing nature of this pandemic. And then finally, yes, it's not all negative for everyone. There are a subset of individuals who are reporting that their sleep has improved in some ways. Largely, it's been a result of the change in schedules and working remotely, with no longer having a commute. They're actually able to kind of catch up on sleep and sleep a bit longer. So that has been a positive outcome for some individuals. All right. So when we're talking about taking steps on how to improve your sleep, it's really helpful to have a basic understanding of how sleep works, and namely kind of what systems within our bodies regulate our ability to sleep and our ability to wake. These two variables are important because when we're talking about sleep difficulties, it's actually a 24-hour issue as opposed to an issue that just occurs solely at night. The two key systems that regulate our sleep are referred to as the body clock and the sleep drive. These systems work together to balance sleep and alertness at the appropriate times, in the appropriate amounts, over the course of a 24-hour period. Although these are physiological systems, our behaviors can impact them. Therefore, what we do or don't do allows us to influence our sleep regulation to some degree. All right, so let's chat a bit about the body clock. So this is a circadian system, which just means that it focuses on the daily rhythm of sleep over the course of approximately 24 hours. The amount of sleep you're getting, whether too much or too little, does not have an impact on the system in any way. The body clock synchronizes our sleep, as well as some other important bodily functions, with the dark light cycle of night and day. Some of the other bodily systems involved in the body clock include alertness, feeding, and the release of certain hormones. So although the body clock is a biological process, there are things you can do to ensure that it kind of runs efficiently and reliably. And the first is maintaining a consistent schedule of daily activities. So this includes sleep and rise times, as well as other activities such as meals, exercise, and social interactions. Those kind of other activities are called daily rhythms, and they provide important cues to the circadian system in terms of keeping these various bodily functions synchronized and running on schedule. The second factor that really influences our body clock is exposure to light. Light exposure plays a primary role in your body's release of melatonin, the hormone melatonin, which plays a key role in sleep. Melatonin levels tend to start increasing in the evening when darkness falls, which is what ends up kind of promoting feelings of being drowsy or sleepy. Those melatonin levels kind of steadily increase up until about near one's kind of regular bedtime, and then they're maintained throughout the night until they naturally begin to drop towards morning around your regular rise time. Upon waking, that light exposure that you experience suppresses that release of melatonin, which promotes feelings of alertness or wakefulness. And this is maintained throughout the day until evening when darkness falls and this cycle begins again. So light exposure plays a critical role at kind of a chemical level in terms of the release of this hormone and the suppression of this hormone that plays such a critical role in our ability to be asleep and our ability to be alert. All right, so our other key system involved in sleep regulation is the sleep drive. So this is a homeostatic system, which means this system is all about balance. This system seeks to balance a person's activities while they're awake with their need for sleep. So the amount of sleep that you're getting absolutely impacts the system because a person's need for sleep is based on the cumulative amount of time they've been awake. Sleep drive is essentially the pressure your body produces to sleep over the course of 24 hours. When you wake up in the morning and get out of bed, your sleep drive starts steadily building over the course of the day as you're up and about. The more time you spend awake and active, the stronger your sleep drive will be at bedtime, and usually the easier it's going to be to fall asleep. The less time you spend awake and active, the more reduced that sleep drive is going to become bedtime, and folks usually find that it's either harder to fall asleep or stay asleep. So obviously, given that consistency, light exposure, and activity all play a key role in these regulation systems, it's kind of easy to see how a lot of these changes as a result of the pandemic could really impact each of these systems. So with regards to the body clock, again, where consistency of scheduling and light exposure is so important, some of the pandemic issues that can really impact this system include, really ongoing difficulty maintaining a consistent schedule due to remote work, online schooling, various safety restrictions, reduced light exposure due to spending more time indoors, and possibly even a lower levels of light exposure within your home versus what you might experience at your office or at school. And then finally, increased technology use. One of the things that we're seeing is that people are spending a lot more time on social media over the course of this pandemic, and that increased technology use, especially into the evenings and at night, results in kind of extended light exposure, which again is really going to impact that release of melatonin that we're usually hoping for and typically takes place over the course of an evening up until bedtime. In terms of sleep drive, I'd say the biggest pandemic-related issues that are impacting that are, again, because of that change in schedule, some folks are finding that they can sleep more, maybe sleeping later, taking naps. And the thing that's important to remember is that sleep drive is really driven by how much time you spend awake. So if you are fitting in some extra sleep here and there, it may be actually diminishing your sleep drive at bedtime so that when you do try to go to bed at your regular hour, it's more difficult to fall asleep. And then reduced activity and exercise because, again, of spending more time at home or just safety measures that don't allow you to engage in some of the type of exercise or activities that you used to. Research shows us that people who are more active sleep better. So reduced activity can absolutely lower that sleep drive. So once again, there's going to be kind of less pressure to fall asleep when you go to bed at night. So when attempting to kind of implement new strategies to try to improve your sleep, it's really useful to have kind of realistic expectations about the quantity and quality of sleep you're going to be getting. So I wanted to take a few moments just to cover these three really common sleep myths. That first kind of sleep myth really centers around the belief that if you don't get at least 8 hours of sleep, it's going to impair your functioning the next day. You're not going to be able to function very well. That 8 hours has kind of become a magic number in some ways. So while research indicates that adults typically need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, individuals have a wide range of sleep needs, and that number is not going to hold true for everyone. Some people function best with 6 hours of sleep a night. Some people can't barely begin to function unless they have at least 9 hours of sleep at night. And that's okay. That just kind of falls within the normal range of the amount of sleep that different people need for different reasons. So it is important not to become too fixated on a specific number with regards to the amount of sleep that you believe you should be getting, because if you don't reach that number for most people, that results in some level of stress. And as we've learned, stress definitely directly impacts our ability to sleep. So the second sleep myth really centers around the belief that if I've had a good night's sleep, I'm going to wake up feeling well rested and refreshed. When in fact, for most people, it's fairly normal to feel sleepy or groggy up to about the first 30 minutes or so after you wake up. This is actually called sleep inertia or sleep drunkenness. It's really associated with the stage of sleep that you were in at the time that you awakened. But the kind of take-home point here is just be aware how you're feeling immediately or shortly after waking is not necessarily indicative of your quality of sleep the night before or of how you're going to be feeling or functioning the remainder of the day. And then finally, this last sleep myth, and I think this is one of the most important ones to kind of debunk right off the bat. As a clinician and having worked many years with clients who struggle with sleep difficulties, this is one that I have found really create a lot of stress for individuals. So this third sleep myth really centers around the belief that in order to have like a good night's sleep, that means I'm going to fall asleep when I go to bed and I'm going to sleep straight through until morning without waking up. This, unfortunately, is actually a just completely unrealistic expectation because brief awakenings or arousals are a normal part of our sleep process. Research indicates that we typically experience on average about 12 awakenings over the course of the night, and many of those awakenings are so brief we are not aware of them and don't remember them. And over the course of having these various awakenings through the night, including the ones that you do remember, research indicates that on average, we usually spend about 30 minutes or so awake in bed trying to return to sleep altogether. So I just think this is really important information for folks to be aware of, especially with regards to your expectations around what waking up in the middle of the night means, and if you aren't able to immediately fall back to sleep, kind of what that indicates about your sleep and functioning. All right, so now I know we spent some time chatting about sleep difficulties and the different things that contribute to them. So we're now gonna kind of switch over to our problem solving mode and really start talking about different practices or guidelines that you can utilize to really try to improve your sleep and kind of develop some healthy sleep habits. So a lot of what we're gonna be reviewing are research-based strategies for enhancing sleep. But please just know that these guidelines and practices, are not intended to supplement or substitute professional treatment for a sleep disturbance if such type of care is warranted. The following information is really being provided as self-help tools for your own use, but I will be touching on some suggestions about seeking professional assistance towards the end of today's webinar. So the strategies that we're going to outline are going to involve a combination of reducing certain behaviors that interfere with sleep, as well as attempting to implement or increase other behaviors that we know help promote good sleep. Again, just keep in mind, these recommendations are being made in the context of sleep disturbance or sleep difficulties. One of the common things you'll hear, and we'll chat about it today, is that if you're having difficulty sleeping, eliminate naps. However, if you're somebody who has regularly kind of incorporated naps into part of your daily routine due to your work schedule or your lifestyle, and you're not experiencing kind of consistent sleep difficulties, there's likely no need to eliminate those altogether. So again, just kind of take all this into consideration. Those recommendations, while we know that they optimize sleep, they really are being offered within the context of kind of an ongoing sleep difficulties. And we are going to offer a range of strategies because, we know that not all of these are going to apply or be feasible or even appeal to everyone. So definitely want you to have a set of options to choose from, to be able to try out different things, and to be able to determine what's really going to work best for you and your specific situation. All right, so we're not quite done with those sleep regulation systems yet because they are incredibly important and they play a primary role in how well we sleep. So like I said, we've touched on a few things that are important to keep in mind in terms of really ensuring these systems run efficiently, but I do want to highlight some additional suggestions to really try to optimize these systems as much as possible. So again, going back to our body clock, which really helps kind of synchronize our sleep with that light dark schedule of day and night. Consistency with those daily activities, especially sleep and rise times, is very important. If you are struggling with sleep difficulties, it's strongly encouraged that you try to keep your sleep and rise times as consistent as possible, even on weekends, even on days off. What research shows us is that by varying your sleep by more than 1 hour, so getting an extra hour of sleep more than you usually get, or losing an hour of sleep kind of less than you usually get, that can sometimes even result in symptoms of jet lag for individuals. So for people who say, I have a really regular sleep schedule, but on Sundays, I really like to sleep in. Sleeping in those extra maybe 2-3 hours can actually be the equivalent for some folks as flying across 2 or 3 time zones. So again, that consistency is really important because it just speaks to how finely kind of synchronized these systems are and how much better they run when they're able to kind of remain synchronized and consistent. With regards to light exposure, natural light helps our body clock run the most reliably. So in the context of kind of quarantine and working from home, just wanted to offer some kind of additional suggestions on how to ensure that you might be getting adequate light exposure over the course of the day. One is that when you wake up, first thing, go ahead and open those window coverings just to try to give yourself kind of immediate exposure to daylight. If you do tend to spend most of your day indoors, try to get outside for brief breaks at all possible, just to be out in natural light and sunlight. And if that's not feasible, just consider if it might be possible within your home or within your setting, could you at least maybe on occasion spend a little time sitting next to a bright window or sitting next to the sunny window, even if it's doing another task, returning emails, doing a phone call, having a meal. We just really want to look for ways to ensure that you're able to kind of get consistent and adequate light exposure over the course of the day, especially folks who are now spending most of their time indoors or within the home. With regards to that increased technology use, one way to kind of reduce that additional light exposure in the evenings is to set an electronic curfew, which basically is just kind of cutting off tech use and screen time at least 30 to 60 minutes prior to bedtime. With our second system, the sleep drive, again, while consistency is important, one thing to keep in mind is that if you do have a day where as you're approaching your regular bedtime and you just simply are not sleepy at all, consider postponing bedtime until you're starting to feel drowsy. What we typically find is that trying to force yourself to sleep is counterproductive. But if you are able to attempt to go to bed when you're just kind of naturally feeling sleepy or drowsy, this usually results in falling asleep easier and sleeping a bit better. Now, coming back to naps. So essentially, the reason naps sometimes are counteractive or counterproductive for us in terms of improving sleep is that napping essentially reduces your sleep drive because those additional hours of sleep during the day are going to lower that pressure to fall asleep when you go to bed at night. However, if you do need to nap based on your work schedule or safety concerns around completing a certain task like driving or operating machinery, a couple guidelines. Consider a power nap. Try to limit it to about 20-30 minutes at the most, and try to get that nap in kind of more, at least by early to mid-afternoon. The earlier and further you can get that nap in away from your bedtime, the less potential for it to have a negative impact on your sleep drive. Once that nap's over, you're just going to have that many more hours and that much more time for that sleep drive to start gradually building up again. And finally, back to our exercise. Like we said, we know that exercise and activity helps promote better sleep. It does not have to be super intensive exercise. You know, research shows that just moderate exercise, a 30-minute brief walk, can help enhance sleep. So try to get in some daily exercise or activity as well. All right, so this next strategy really centers around trying to create a very strong mental association between your bed or bedroom and sleep. So what we want is for that bed to be a cue to our brain and body that that bed is for sleeping versus being awake. And the best way to strengthen this association is to, as much as possible, limit sleep to the bed. So what this means is trying to ensure that the amount of time you actually spend in your bed is spent sleeping. And there's a couple ways that we can do that. So the first is, if you're having trouble sleeping, if you're unable to fall asleep or return to sleep within 15, 20 minutes at the most, it is recommended that you get out of bed, go into another room, and engage in some type of kind of calming or easing activity until you start to feel sleepy again, and then return to bed. This is because the longer we lay in bed at night, not sleeping, struggling to sleep, stressing about not sleeping, the stronger we're making that a mental association between being in bed and not sleeping. And that's exactly what we don't want. So that recommendation for leaving the room is really a way to kind of break that association and help train our brain and body to realize that that bed really is about sleep. During that interval, like we said, just try to engage in a restful or relaxing activity. The key really is just not to do anything that's too stimulating or activating. Depending upon what activity you're doing, if you can keep the lights dim, keep noise or sound kind of minimal or low, that can be helpful as also. The second key way to really build this strong mental association between bed and sleep is to avoid doing wakeful activities in bed. So whether it be reading, watching movies, surfing the net, talking on the phone, truthfully, to really build that association between bed and sleep, other than sex, sleep is the only thing you should be doing in your bed and bedroom. Kind of all other activities should kind of be relocated elsewhere. And again, the reason behind that is when we're doing wakeful activities in bed, even if it's reading or watching a favorite show, it may be non-stressful, it may be enjoyable, but wakeful activities promote alertness. And that really strengthens that association between being in bed and being awake. And that is the exact association we don't want. We want that bed to be linked to sleep. So, and I will say, as a clinician, and kind of over the years of working with folks with sleep difficulties, this is probably one of the hardest strategies for folks to implement or to be willing to implement. Because, in this day and age, especially with portable electronic devices, we can basically live in our beds. And we can take meals, we can work, we can engage in entertainment, we can now socialize with all of the Skyping and Zooming and FaceTiming and video chats. So just please be aware, this sometimes can be a tough one to institute. Absolutely. If your gut response to this is like, no way, I basically kind of live out of my bed, and to no longer do that seems pretty unimaginable. That's okay. You are not alone with that. But just please be aware that if you are somebody who is spending a lot of time doing other activities in your bed, other than sleeping, and you are struggling with some sort of significant sleep difficulties, this may be a strategy that might be worth checking out or trying to implement just to test it out and see if you get any benefit from it. All right, so another strategy is instituting a wind down period. And this basically is just incorporating into your nightly routine a designated interval that's going to serve as your transition period from wake time to sleep time. So the key to this is that during this interval, just avoid activities that may be particularly stimulating or stressful. So this wind down period, is not the time to jump on the treadmill, update your Outlook calendar, do one final scan of emails, but it's also not the time to discuss emotional or conflictual topics. It's not the time to kind of expose yourself to content that may exacerbate stress in some way, whether it be the news, social media, television, or reading. Because as we know, stress is going to result in arousal. Arousal is going to promote alertness, and alertness is going to interfere for sleep. So your best bet during this wind down period, which absolutely can include kind of your bathing and shifting over to sleep mode, can just be a range of different types of calming activities. And when we get a little further in the webinar, I am going to highlight some apps that actually offer some great relaxation and meditation exercises geared towards sleep that can be a great option for using during this interval. All right, so sleep environment. Now, this is going to be highly individualized, kind of based just on your setting, your environment, and your sleep options. But it's just important for folks to be aware. Research indicates that dark, cool, quiet environment tends to promote better sleep. So think of bats in a cave, okay? Nocturnal animals sleep all day. What do they typically seek out? Dark, cool, quiet. With regards, within those different areas, with regards to lighting, so again, yes, lighting can certainly disrupt your sleep in terms of waking you up. So ensuring that windows are covered, electronics are turned off, possibly using an eye mask, that can be helpful. But a lot of those recommendations around lighting really center around that body clock and that release of melatonin that's occurring throughout the night. If you get up to use the restroom and flip on a bright overhead light, even those few moments of bright light exposure have the potential to interfere with that nice steady release of melatonin that we receive during the night that helps promote drowsiness and sleepiness. So the more that you can utilize low light, night lights, those types of things over the course of the night, if you do need to get up, that can really help kind of maintain that consistent release of melatonin and promote sleep. Just with regards to temperature, research shows us that most people tend to fall asleep more quickly and sleep better in a slightly cool room. So just kind of be aware of that. With sound, this varies a bit. The goal really is to minimize disruptive sounds that are going to prevent you from sleeping or disrupt your sleep. However, there's a wide range of preferences for sound. Some folks find that they can't sleep if it's too quiet. Others really like having kind of a steady background noise to help drown out other sounds, like the use of a fan or a white noise machine. So it's really just a matter of kind of recognizing where you are on that continuum of what level of sound you need or don't need in order to sleep best, and then being able to kind of meet that as much as possible. And finally, with comfort, I just wanted to add a few kind of general FYIs for folks to be aware of. With regards to kind of bedding and the comfort of pillows and mattresses, just be aware, mattresses wear out after 10 years. When purchasing a mattress, it's always important to test it out in the store. Many mattresses are designed to be more comfortable for certain sleep positions than others. So it's important to inquire with your salesperson about that. And if you have a preferred sleep position, if you are somebody who always ends up sleeping on your stomach or sleeping on your left side, try out that sleep position when you're trying the mattress, because that's going to give you the best estimate of how comfortable that mattress is going to be for you. And then sleep clothing. So this is an important one just to be aware of. Sleep clothing should be different than what you wear during the day, even in the context of quarantine or sheltering in place. Having designated sleep clothing really serves as a cue, again, that mental association, to help our brain and body transition into sleep mode. So even if it's just a matter of changing from your daytime t-shirt to your sleep time t-shirt, that's still going to send a signal to the brain and body that it's time to make that transition from wake time to sleep time. So just another little thing you can always tweak if that's not something you actively do, that can sometimes help promote better sleep as well. All right, with diet and exercise, the biggest thing is to really seek to reduce any substances that disrupt sleep. And this typically mostly centers around stimulants, anything that's going to kind of counteract being able to feel sleepy, feel drowsy. The general rule of thumb is to avoid products with caffeine 4 to 6 hours before bedtime. and to try to stop using nicotine at least a few hours before bedtime. Now, alcohol is sneaky when it comes to sleep because for many individuals, alcohol results in initially feeling more relaxed and being able to sleep more easily. But after several hours, alcohol actually acts as a stimulant in our systems, and it will cause you to wake up more frequently. So general rule of thumb with alcohol is, as much as possible, try to limit to 1 to 2 drinks a night if you are struggling with sleep problems, and avoid alcohol at least 3 hours before bedtime. Dehydration disrupts sleep, so make sure you're staying hydrated, and try to have your last meal of the day at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. And again, keep in mind when we talked about that body clock works really hard to synchronize sleep with other bodily functions, including feeding. So if we have a night where, you eat a much larger, heavier meal than usual, or you eat your dinner much later than usual, that can throw things off out of sync in terms of synchronizing those systems. And it essentially kind of ends up putting our digestive system and our sleep system at odds with each other, which is what results in the sleep difficulties. We've covered exercise pretty clearly. Again, just putting in another plug for it. It definitely promotes better sleep. It reduces stress. It does have been found to help with symptoms of anxiety and depression, just for kind of general improved mental health. Just be careful that you don't exercise too late in the day, that it could potentially disrupt your sleep. So again, exercise early in the day or at least 3 hours before bedtime. All right, so I now wanted to shift away from some of our kind of very specific sleep issues and just talk about general stress reduction. So my goal here really was to specifically highlight some stress reduction tips that I hoped might be especially resonant in the context of the current pandemic. So the first is media exposure. So research shows that during times of collective crisis, excessive media exposure about that crisis, several hours a day or more, can have a negative impact on your mental health in terms of increasing distress. More recent research is showing that social media may tend to exacerbate anxiety more than traditional media sources. So our general guidelines here are: try to identify and obtain your information from 1 or 2 key reliable media sources, and set some parameters around how the frequency and duration of how often you're going to kind of take in that media information. This is really going to be up to you in terms of that frequency and duration, what's going to work best. But the key is view enough media coverage to stay informed, but limit exposure to prevent stress and anxiety. With regards to social connection, so research shows us that strong social connection enhances resilience to stress, but we also know that as a result of the pandemic and social distancing, connecting with others has become impaired for many people. So some tips for enhancing social connection in the context of the pandemic: try to connect with others on a daily basis in whatever way you have available: phone, video, text, social media, participating in a virtual social gathering. Regular interpersonal connection and contact is important. Seek support by sharing negative experiences with trusted family and friends. People need to talk to people, especially during times of significant stress or significantly negative events. Avoidance of talking about it and keeping those feelings bottled up often leads to greater negative outcomes down the line with regards to your mental and physical health. And finally, consider offering or providing support to others. Our APA poll indicated that most people feel like they could have used more emotional support. Research shows us that giving support to others increases our positive emotions and decreases our negative emotions. It also helps keep relationships balanced. You may feel more willing to reach out for support from a friend you've recently supported. Hobbies. So this, don't always associate this with stress reduction, but this is something that's really important to be aware of. Because of a lot of the safety restrictions due to the pandemic, this has prevented many people from engaging in their hobbies. And this is significant because for many folks, those designated activities and interests may have been helpful coping mechanisms when dealing with stress: going to the gym, volunteering at their church. So in the context of attempting to manage increased stress, many people may have lost some of their most reliable forms of stress relief. Research tells us that individuals who regularly engage in hobbies not only report lower levels of stress, but also enhanced positive mood. So trying to consistently dedicate some time to engaging in either leisurely or recreational activities that you enjoy can be an effective way of trying to counteract some of the negative impact of stress. And finally, just our kind of designated anxiety reduction techniques. So, research has shown that techniques such as relaxation, mindfulness, and meditation are found to be very effective in decreasing stress and anxiety in the short term, as well as the long term. These types of techniques may be utilized over the course of the day to address acute stress in the moment, or an attempt just to take an edge off your kind of overall levels of stress or anxiety. The other thing, though, is these techniques can absolutely be incorporated to promote better sleep, since these can be utilized during your kind of nightly wind down period, but they also can be used during the night if you're having difficulty falling asleep or are unable to return to sleep. And finally, I just wanted to hook you all up with this particular CDC resource. This is an excellent website in terms of coping with pandemic-related stress, because it will point you in the direction of specific information for special populations: children, teenagers, caregivers, frontline workers. It also provides many hotline numbers and additional resources for mental health. All right, and then seeking professional assistance. So this is kind of the last slide I'm going to cover before we open it up for questions, but I just want to touch on a few things. So the biggest question that often pops up is, how do I know when to seek professional assistance? And there are a few things just to keep in mind. Whatever changes that you're experiencing, disrupted sleep, anxiety, depression, irritability, if those symptoms have become excessive, they're now occurring more frequently than not, it's no longer just a bad night or a bad day. If they are creating a lot of distress for you, kind of starting to feel unmanageable or out of control, if they are impairing your functioning, these changes now are keeping you from being able to complete the things that you need to do or want to do, and if there are safety concerns, thoughts of hurting yourself or others, more frequent thoughts about death, kind of vague, better off dead feelings. These are all indications that things may have reached a tipping point that seeking professional assistance is warranted, at least for an evaluation to try to determine what's going on. That formal evaluation or assessment by a health professional is key in ensuring an accurate diagnosis. And that accurate diagnosis is key in determining the most appropriate and helpful forms of treatment that are going to be available to you. Just please be aware regarding treatment, there are many time-limited evidence-based treatments available for issues such as insomnia, depression, and anxiety. And these last two links are just a few resources. The Psychology Data resource is a great link for just seeking out therapists, a range of types of providers, and it can be based on your location. And then I just wanted to ensure folks had a crisis line kind of at their fingertips, and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is really helpful. It's great for individuals in acute crisis, if you have a loved one that you're concerned about, and for professionals and healthcare providers who may have clients in crisis. And their website also offers a wide range of resources. Okay, so I'm gonna pause there to open it up for any questions. We're doing on time, if we have any left.
Megan, thank you so much. That was so interesting, and I learned so much, and I'm sure that everybody that attended today has learned a lot too. We do have some questions. I'll just go through a couple of them. Number one, we had one about tracking sleep with devices. Would you recommend finding it as a useful tool, and did you have devices that you thought worked well?
Yeah, so there are a wide range of devices out there that track sleep. A lot of them are linked to kind of like Fitbits or smartwatches. But yes, there's actually on the next slide after this, when I show you all the online resources, within any of these online resources, in their search boxes, if you just put in kind of sleep apps or online sleep trackers, you usually can find articles or posts that recommend some. So you can potentially find some there. But yes, some people have found that really useful in just kind of really clarifying how well they're sleeping In general, we aren't the best judge of how we're sleeping. Research shows that most people tend to really underestimate how well they've slept or really overestimate how badly they've slept. So sometimes sleep trackers can be really helpful in clarifying that.
Okay, it's wonderful. We had another question about something that would be an aid, something called a happy light. What is your thought about that to get adequate light exposure?
Oh, okay. So there are a range of things out there that can help with light exposure. I'm not familiar with necessarily with the research behind those. I would say that with a lot of these suggestions, especially with like the apps or the lights, it could just be kind of a trial and error. We do know that light exposure is important for that kind of suppression and release of melatonin. So I think they're certainly worth considering if you feel like there's other options that we've talked about may not work for you, or that just might be kind of easier and more feasible.
Okay. There was another question that kind of made me laugh because I've done this. When you talked about sleep hygiene and setting that mood and telling yourself when you should be setting up your cues, when someone asked, does that mean I should not switch into PJs as soon as I get home?
So you know what? One thing that I would honestly consider is have your evening PJs and have your nighttime PJs, sleep time PJs. That transition of new clothing or designated clothing when you are truly preparing to go to sleep really does help strengthen that association of helping your body make that transition. But I mean, at this point, we all have daytime pajamas and nighttime pajamas. So I think you're probably right in line with just about where everybody is right now.
Right. We did have a quick question about someone who is stressed and has central sleep apnea, and that makes it hard for them to get to REM sleep. So do you think that the tips that you shared today would be helpful, or should they seek possibly some professional help?
So when we're dealing with some of the medical issues like sleep apnea, that is something that I would definitely consult with a physician or a sleep expert about, only because there are so many things that can contribute to sleep disruption. But when you do have a formal diagnosis and they've been able to kind of nail it down, you really want to try to use that diagnosis to guide the types of treatments or interventions that you want to implement and what's going to work best for that particular sleep problem. And I will say with these websites, almost all of these do have sections on sleep disorders and sleep difficulties, including sleep apnea. So you may be able to find some more information out there as well.
Wonderful.
Megan, we are nearly at time.
Yes.
I have learned so much, and you really did have me at daytime pajamas and nighttime pajamas. That's a great idea. We usually have, a last question from the audience, but I know you have a question you want to pose to the audience. So yes, you get the last question turned the other way today.
That's great. So y'all, I'm just going to knock down these slides for now. To ask was, just based on how today went, what were kind of the key takeaways for you? What was the thing that was most resonant, maybe the new piece of information that was most meaningful to you, just to try to get a sense of kind of what landed for folks and was kind of the most influential. So just feel free to type into the chat box kind of what your reactions to this were, what was most helpful. Sleep drawing.
Wonderful.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And Megan, we can save this part of the chat for you.
Oh, great.
So you can get the feedback afterwards about, what people are experiencing.
That's great. But no, I'm glad. I was very curious to see kind of, like I said, what was most resonant. And just a word about those mobile apps. The first two apps are apps that are geared towards relaxation, namely mindfulness and meditation. They both have sleep programs. So they have specific sections of their app that are designated for sleep, sleep sounds, sleep stories, different exercises to promote good sleep. COVID Coach actually applies to it's been developed by National Center for PTSD to address a range of mental health reactions people have been having to the pandemic. It is a free app. These are all research-based techniques, and that can be an incredibly useful app to download and have on hand kind of whenever you may need to pull on it.
Great. Well, Megan, we are right at time. Is there any final thought that you want to offer the audience before we send them out?
No, other than just thank you so much for your investment in this topic and your willingness to spend an hour with us. I certainly hope this was helpful and hopeful. Just please remember, in the context of all these major stressors that we may not have direct control over, it can be really empowering to be aware of what you can directly influence at a personal level and be equipped to do so. So I certainly hope that today helped move you in that direction. But thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for your generosity with your time and your expertise. Lots of great information shared. Thank you to Tiffany, my co-host. So happy to have you with us today. And to our audience, please stay healthy and safe out there. Take care of yourself. And before I say a final goodbye, it occurs to me to mention that Dr. Keys is doing a 3-part series for us, the first 3 Thursdays in December, specifically on stress management for folks that are in the healthcare or public health profession. Doesn't mean other people can't crash the gate, but knowing that we have heroes that are working very, very hard and wanting to give them good tools. So maybe look for that, maybe spread the word if you have a friend or family member in that field. But with that, goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.